Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Welcome back to the Kiana Canada Show. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and your shares, what it does is it pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that videos like this are important. But we must be reminded that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, that is not an indication that videos like this are not important. As a second preliminary issue, don't forget to head over to my Facebook and subscribe there or follow me on Facebook. I only have two social media accounts that I have access to, which is my Facebook account, which I will link in the description box below, and this YouTube account, which is at Real Kiana Canada. Other accounts that are under my name, which is my TikTok account, my Substack account, LinkedIn, all of these other accounts, cyber hackers have locked me out of these accounts because they don't like my activism and they don't like my political commentary. And so that's really something that is disconcerting to me, but we cannot let that stop us from being able to move forward with information that we do find to be of importance. Thirdly, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas out there. I know that Christmas can be a depressing time of the year, and the reason why it is often depressing is because we are either separated, distanced, estranged from family, likely or substantially owing to the fact that family could be on a different continent, different country, different state, city, and that could be saddening for some of us. And so I want to push you forward with in the best possible way to push through it and to find your happiness during this time if it is distressing for you, because I think that with anything, like, we can get through it, right? This topic that we are going to be talking about this evening is not necessarily one of the most uplifting topics because it has to do with war. And war can be distressing for most, if not all, people. And if you have been following the headlines, you understand that on Christmas Day, the United States struck I think it's pronounced the Gidon Sama and Tumua communities. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I really do apologize. That the United States struck those communities, and this is raising an important question as to whether or not this is going to be a limited war or whether or not this is going to turn into a total war. Before delving deeply into this discussion, it's important to state that although I do consider myself to be racially literate, my understanding of the politics in Nigeria is very minimal. What I've learned about Nigeria really is coming from Nigerians that are part of the diaspora community within the Republic of Ireland and Canada. There's not many Nigerians that I have encountered here in Belfast. Not to say that there isn't Nigerian communities in Belfast, but I haven't really encountered many Nigerians here in Belfast to be able to understand like their political issues or their plights, etc. But the introduction that I did have in the Republic of Ireland as well as in Canada was an introduction with an immigrant communities, diaspora communities, which were brought together by food and the Nigerians that I were introduced to in the Republic of Ireland as well as in Canada loved their culture and loved to share their cuisine. And if you haven't tasted Nigerian food, I would urge you to do so. It's very tasty. They have really delicious dishes, and I would just urge you to really try their food. And African food is delicious, in general. But so that's like partially an introduction that I had to Nigerians is through their food, because oftentimes within these immigrant communities, ethnic communities come together, and one way to bond is through food. The second, I think, way in which immigrant communities bond with each other is through religion. Now, if you've been following my story and you know me, you know that I'm not a religious person. I am a deist. I don't go to church. I don't think that I would ever attend church. It's interesting, but before we get into today's topic, I just want to lighten the mood a bit before we talk about this distressing issue. But when I was in Belfast a couple of days ago, I was walking down the street and some Mormons approached me and they were like, "Do you want to come to church with us on Sunday?" And I was like, "No, thank you, but thank you so much." And then I continued to walk, and then I was approached again the same day within a 5 minute time span by another group of not Muslims, another group of Mormons, and they said, "Do you want to come to church with us?" And I was like, "No, I don't." But I said, "Unless there's some really cute guys in church. Are there some cute guys there?" And it was just a joke, but I had to lighten the mood because, there's this perception that religion for people who are non-practicing are inconvenienced by people who are attempting to fellowship to them. And so I just wanted to lighten the mood. Even though I said no, I was like, "Well, are there any cute guys there?" So my understanding of Nigeria is very minimal. And I often, when I seek to understand culture and the historical context of Descendant of Slaves, I have often looked to, like, what are the gods in each country? So, like in Nigeria and the continent of Africa, there is the African people have their own gods, just as the Swedish people have their own gods. The Romans have their own gods, and then the Nordic gods. I think every country or continent has their own gods and mythology. And my introduction to learning about Nigeria is through their African gods. Now, I often would Google different gods in Africa, but what seemed to be dominant on Google are the African gods, such as Ogun, who is a god of protection, who I often call on for help. In the spiritual sense, I call on Ogun just to protect me and to protect, my environment, which I think that we all can do when we're calling on protection. But again, to reiterate, there are different gods in each country and on different continents, and the way in which you practice is that you feel comfortable should be the way that you practice or whatever you believe in should be of comfort to you and not out of your comfort zone. And for me, oftentimes I would call on a goon for protection just to protect my environment. And like, I haven't really seen any Black American gods within the United States, and I'll have to look and do further research to see if like that's something that I'm missing. Okay, so let's delve deeply into this topic. Now, I did not do a lot of research on what we are going to be talking about tonight. I this is the information that I looked up is just I did a cursory review, so I didn't thoroughly read the information that I did consult. And and so, as you know, the United States struck Nigeria, the Sokoto region, and the US's position for doing so is that it believes that there is extremism in that part of Nigeria. And if you have been following American politics lately, you know that the United States is arguing that Christians are being harmed in Nigeria. There are some politicians that disagree with the United States' position that Christians are being harmed. There has been human rights groups that have come out in opposition of that narrative and said that they don't think that that is entirely true. But there was a video posted earlier today or yesterday where a politician or someone in Nigeria has stated that there does seem to be some conflict that is happening to Christians within that part of the country. And as you can see, like, I am not an authority on this. The information that we're receiving online is scattered and not consistent. But going back to the subject at hand, the United States believes that there is harm happening to the Christians in that part of the state. And so what happened was, what I learned is that this was collaboration or between the United States and the Nigerian government to go into that part of the region and to contain that conflict. Now, there are social media influencers that are of the opinion that this bellicism is part of the United States plan to conduct regime change in the nation. And there are a lot of positions that seem to be accurate. So, for example, with the regime change, influencers are stating that partially the reason why the United States seeks for there to be a regime change is because it wants access to those resources. So essentially land reform, right? If the United States can go onto that land and have access to those resources, it can distribute it amongst itself and its allies. And some politicians and activists, social media influencers, independent media journalists are taking issue with that. Another issue is that I think there is this question that we have whether or not this is going to stay at a limited war with limited aims, or whether this is going to turn into a total war. But I don't think that this is going to become a total war for a number of reasons. I think that the United States is focusing on this small state, or this, or, well, I don't know how big it is, but just this portion of that state. And I don't think that other nations within the continent of Africa is going to get involved. Now, I could be wrong. Everything is up in the air right now. This is subject to change. But I really don't think that there is going to be assistance from other African nations or Islamic nations that are going to come in and fight on the behalf of that portion, the Sokoto state, like we have seen with Israel and Palestine. You know, when Israel and Palestine were in conflict, you had Iran that weighed in on it, or that contributed to the conflict. You had Lebanon that contributed to the conflict. You had those surrounding states such as Yemen, Lebanon, Iran, and all of those Islamic states that, you know, were part of this war against Israel. And so I think people are wondering whether the same thing is going to happen in Africa, whether other Islamic states within Africa are going to come to the aid of the Sokoto state. But I just don't see that happening. But to reiterate, anything is possible. Anything could happen between now and when I end this video. So we just never know. Another issue is that I heard people complaining about is whether this is, again, Pax Americana, which oftentimes what will happen with these wars is that United States will, it will be peace that is, that the United, it will be peace induced by the United States, but for American interest, right? And I think that from what I'm listening to, this seems to be what most people are concerned about, right? They're concerned that this this Pax Americana does not benefit the surrounding nations within Africa, or it doesn't really benefit anyone else but America, American interest. And this can be troublesome for American citizens as well, because there's this fundamental attribution error where I think that other nations and foreign nationals believe that the actions of the US government are the actions of American citizens. And as a result of that, we are on the receiving end of microaggressions and sometimes aggression by foreign nationals because our country has went in and destabilized those nations. Now, I think it is safe to say that the Sokoto state maybe partially has been destabilized. And I wanted to look, if not briefly, about what this could be about. And so what I did was I went to the 2022 yearbook of immigration statistics, which is published by the Office of Homeland Security. And one of the questions that I asked myself was, okay, well, could this be happening because there's been an influx of Nigerians within the United States coming into the United States, and could that be a reason? As we know that the United States has put a travel ban on certain nations, mostly nations, Islamic nations, and Nigeria, I believe, is partially banned because of the Islamic territories that it has within it. And so when I gave a cursory review of the statistics, I looked to see whether or not that there were Nigerians coming into the country, and the migration into the United States, the Nigerian migration to the United States is very minimal compared to other nations. And so I don't think that migration within the United States would be the impetus or spawn this kind of bellicism from the United States. Another important issue is that I looked at Amnesty International to get a better understanding of Nigeria's human rights record. And partially, I think that the information that is published by Amnesty International is impartial, but I have to be honest that Amnesty International is quoting itself a lot within these publications. And so I would like to see more information coming from other resources as it relates to what is happening in foreign nations abroad. But what I gathered from what Amnesty International published was that there was testimony from women within Nigeria, especially women who are Christian, that have stated that they have been forced to convert to Islam. Now, some may argue, well, it could be the other way around as well. And I don't dispute that. Like, I don't have the facts in front of me to make that argument. And to reiterate, I didn't read that publication fully. I just looked to see, like, okay, could this be an issue? Because this is what is being put forward by the US government. And there was other evidence within that report that Amnesty International published that stated that, girls, they couldn't go to school because they were Christian. And so there does appear to be an argument that a factually based argument that there is persecution of Christian women in Nigeria. Now, that does not mean that there's not persecution of any other women in Nigeria, or persecution of other women of any other faith, because again, this is a large state, and because it's tenuous there within that region, it could be persecution all across the board. But I think what Americans are focusing on, and again, Nigerian politics is not within my lexicon, so this is going to be a topic that I am going to have to do more research on, because I really want to give any topic that I talk about justice. I know sometimes people come online and they talk about a political issue and they read a headline and they go off of that headline and then they make their opinion. And that's really not how I approach issues, which probably can be very boring at times. I like to gain a better understanding, a nuanced view of the politics, and then bring that to you. But I will reiterate that social media influencers, especially independent media journalists, they are of the opinion that the United States is attempting to cause regime change in Nigeria because they want access to those resources. And so what I did was I did a brief search to see what resources there are in Nigeria, and there is gold as well as other resources within that nation. And so that is not entirely false. We can't rule that out. Howsoever, I personally don't know what resources the United States is looking for. Um, we would have to compare what maybe China has to what the United States has, because there are certain resources that China has in abundance that the United States just does not have. And the question is whether Nigeria has those resources that may replace what China has, so that the United States does not have to rely on China for those resources. It begs the question, right? Another point of contention for Americans is Nicki Minaj did an interview with E Kirk on the conservative stage. As you know, my politics are, I'm a socialist, and I would likely disagree with most of anything that is on the conservative stage. And I must admit that I only watched a small portion of the interview that Minaj did with Kirk. And so I'll probably have to go back and watch that video in its entirety to really give an informed opinion about what I think Minaj is saying, her perspective, and whether or not I agree with it or disagree with it. I tend to disagree with most, if not all, conservative positions. But again, to give that interview a fair hearing is something that I have to go back and listen to in its entirety. Interestingly enough, Dr. Umar did watch that interview, and he did an interview with, I forget who interviewed him, but it was a well-informed discussion. And I understand that there is opinions about Dr. Umar. Some people think that he is a charlatan because of what's happening with the school, and it's taking him so long to build that school. And because I don't know his financial circumstances, I really don't know anything about him. I can only go off of what I know, what I'm seeing online. And sometimes what we see online can be the information that we're viewing online can only be part of the story and not the full story. And so I am not going to make a judgment off of that information. The interview that he did do on the topic of Nicki Minaj was well informed, maybe coming from a Pan-Africanist perspective. And I think in the next video I'll upload will have my opinions about Nicki Minaj's interview with Kirk, as well as Dr. Umar's perspective, maybe some other perspectives. But I just wanted to let you know that there was a different perspective that was seemed to be rational, which was Dr. Umar's perspective. He's of the opinion, and this is not to say that he's correct, but he is of the opinion that Nicki Minaj is that the conservative movement is using Nicki Minaj to replace other Black conservatives that have fallen out with the conservative movement. And I don't entirely agree with that, although there is a rational basis for it. I don't entirely agree with that perspective because, as you know, Nicki Minaj has hemorrhaged a lot of her followers. So I believe 10 million people unsubscribed to Nicki Minaj after her interview with Kirk. And after she hemorrhaged those subscribers, she deleted her Instagram account. And so this is, I think, evidence for us that politics can be brutal, and Nicki Minaj deleting her Instagram account or hiding it could also be the fact that, could be difficult for her to deal with. We don't know. Maybe we don't know why she did it, but that is one of the assumptions. And I think over time, Nicki Minaj will understand how polarizing politics can be. And I don't think that I don't think she's in it for the long haul. Let's just say that. I don't think that she's going to be in it for the long haul. And she just doesn't seem to be a person that's really interested in politics. Maybe she is interested in Christianity. But again, everybody has an awakening. And this could be her awakening. Maybe there was a political person within her that is struggling to be heard, and maybe now she has a platform to speak about what has really been on her mind politically. But then, to reiterate, people often point to the fact that Kirk said that Nicki Minaj was not a role model to Black women, and that there seems to be some inconsistencies and contradictions within Turning Point and its platforming of Minaj. So what do you think? Do you think that Nicki Minaj is in it for the long haul? Do you think that this is just pandering to the conservative movement? Do you think that the conservatives are looking to replace some of its Black conservatives that have fallen out? Do you think that this is a limited war in Nigeria, or it's going to transform into a total war? Do you think that Americans, as well as other nations, are going to be thrusted into another war? Do you think that the United States is attempting to destabilize the extremism that is happening within Nigeria because it is really seeking to help the Nigerian government? There is cooperation with the Nigerian government, where this is a bipartisan effort of both states, that the Nigerian government has acquiesced to the United States coming in and, destabilizing what it considers to be extremism. And according to reports, that is what's happening. There are extremes and extremist movements within Nigeria. So do you think that that is the United States' core mission, or do you think that the United States' underlying mission is to have access to the resources that is within that nation? All these things I want to know. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.